The documents published by Der Spiegel that reported on the NSA surveillance of Chancellor Merkel's cell phone calls don't really indicate the extent to which German intelligence agents were aware of or were involved in that surveillance, if at all. So it's hard for me to answer that question specifically. But what I will say more generally is that there is an obvious relationship between the NSA and the German intelligence agency. It's a much, much more limited and discrete relationship than, for example, the NSA relationship with the GCHQ in the UK or with the Canadian, Australian, and New Zealand intelligence services. But it does exist. I would be surprised, speaking just speculatively based on my knowledge of the documents, if German intelligence agents were aware of the most invasive forms of NSA spying done against the German population or against the German leadership. In one sense, it's a little bit fictitious to talk about the NSA and the GCHQ as separate entities because they work together in partnership so closely on virtually everything they do. And sometimes they'll divide up labor in order to circumvent their own legal restrictions or in order to overcome technological obstacles. But in virtually every case, they work hand in hand. The NSA pays the GCHQ. The GCHQ, like all British political entities do, take orders very obediently from the U.S. political circle. And so it really is not very meaningful to talk about them as being distinct. That said, it really is true that the GCHQ often eagerly engages in some of the more invasive and aggressive forms of surveillance, even things the NSA won't do. And they target their fellow EU states probably more aggressively than the NSA does, in part because of their physical proximity and access to the telecommunications system. So I do think there has been a little bit too much emphasis in the EU debate on what the NSA is doing, and definitely too little on what their fellow EU state in the UK is doing. The UK is a government that has proven itself to be virtually limitless and highly abusive when it comes to attack on a free press and when it comes to invading the privacy of hundreds of millions of Europeans. And I do think that some more focus on what the British are doing is definitely warranted. There's no question that information gathering by internet giants like Google and Facebook, Yahoo, pose a very serious and profound threat to individual privacy and even to democracy. There's no question that the private sector in Silicon Valley had been eagerly cooperating with the NSA in virtually every way, far beyond what the law requires, prior to the Snowden revelations. I think the Snowden revelations, one of the effects that they've had is to make it very dangerous for the future business interests of these companies to continue that collaboration, and therefore has put a lot of pressure on them to start to prove to the public that they are not willing to allow the NSA unfettered access to their data any longer. I don't consider Germany an outlier. There are other countries in which the reaction to surveillance has been just as intense, if not more intense, including where I live, in the country in which I live, which is Brazil, where the reaction of the political class and President Rousseff was much more vehement and aggressive in denouncing the United States. President Rousseff canceled the first ever state visit in 4 decades and denounced the U.S. in front of the UN while President Obama waited in the hallway. I don't think any European leaders have shown that degree of courage. And I also don't think that the European population has reacted as angrily as the Brazilian population has. And there are other places in Latin America where the reaction has been quite intense as well. So I wouldn't say that Germany is an outlier by any means. I do think on the scale of countries that have reacted strongly, Germany is closer to the end of countries that have really cared about these stories a lot. In part, that's because of the historical role that privacy invasions have played in German politics, and in part it's because of the volume of stories that have been revealed about NSA targeting of Germans. So I do think that the German reaction has been, relatively speaking, better than a lot of countries, but I would not characterize it as an outlier. This is a debate that has been sustained around the world with a great deal of intensity for a full year now, and I think there are other countries in which the reaction has been even stronger.